What's up, boys? Making this video just in case I don't have the motivation to make a video on Monday when I get home from Montreal. Saw some people requesting this, kind of like a matchups guide slash counter guide, something like that. Let me turn off my fan really quick. Okay, water just fell, whatever. So, just gonna read it left to right. Kind of explain the strong points and where I stand and why I stand there. So, hammer lance. And by the way, so you read it left to right, or like row to column. So the hammer lance matchup is 60-40 for lance. And you can see that there. So, lance really excels against hammer on the ground. Not so much in the air, but ground game is very, very dominated by lance with sidelight and endlight. Hammer doesn't really make up for it in the air. So, that's kind of why I think it's 40-60 for lance. For sword kind of just outclasses hammer pretty much everywhere except for on the edge guard, and that's pretty much it. That's why it's 40-60. Blasters and spear, they both control space so well, and hammer has such a hard time getting in that it's heavily skewed in their favor. How you want to play that as gauntlets and spear, or as blasters and spears, you just want to space them out, respect their hitboxes, and then react, because hammer has extremely reactable moves. Guitars, basically the same thing, it's just not as skewed in my opinion. I think hammer and light can manage guitars a bit. Axis is the only good matchup. Actually, I take that back. There's only two good matchups for axe, and those are lance and hammer. But for the hammer one right now, axe is just hammer, but better on the ground, and that is why it beats it. Hammer sidelight just gets completely outclassed by axe sidelight, and that's pretty much the only move that you need to use in the matchup to win it. Bow, hammer, there's nothing really that happens here. It's more 50-50. Neither weapon really completely outclasses the other in any situation. Gauntlets wise, I think Enlight does a very good job at matching gauntlets on the ground, and Dare is a kind of just completely stuffs gauntlet recovery as well as Nair, and that's why I think Hammer actually wins that matchup. Scythe, I do think that it is Scythe favored, but I don't think Scythe really excels at any matchup. It's more of like an even, like a go even kind of weapon. But I do think that with Scythe, it can stuff every single hammer approach, and that's why I gave it the slight edge. And I'm not going to talk about Cannon anymore after this, but I don't think Cannon is viable at all, and I don't think that it has any good matchups, and it only goes even with Lance because they basically do the same thing. So I already talked about the Hammer-Lance matchup, but for the Lance-Sword matchup, I used to believe that Lance actually had the edge, but I do think Sword is able to manage Lance a bit, but also in the same light. Lance, Nair, and Sair completely destroy Sword in the air. Sword, however, can get in on Lance by approaching from above, and Lance can't really say the same thing. So that's why I think it's 50-50. Lance into blasters and spear is the exact same as hammer. Difficulty getting in. That's kind of a trend with Lance in general. It has a very hard time getting in. Guitars, Lance really excels against the close range weapons because it has such good spacing tools like Enlight, Nair, and D-Light, and I do think that Lance does beat Guitars and Gauntlets. Axe-wise, kind of the same thing as Hammer. Axe Sidelight just stuffs every single ground option from Lance, and D-Light also stuffs every single approach that Lance can throw at the Axe player. Bow, kind of the same as Hammer. I don't really think that Bow really excels at anything, and that's why you're gonna notice that it's neutral primarily in every single matchup, apart from the weapons that actually beat it. And yeah, 50-50 for Lance Bow. Honestly, I haven't really seen the matchup much. It's kind of a rare occurrence, so that's kind of just like my safe number, because I really don't know that much about that particular matchup. And I already touched on Gauntlets, but with Scythe, it's kind of interesting. I think Scythe is managed and kind of controlled by Lance in the air, honestly. With Nair and Dare, Scythe has trouble dealing with that, and honestly, Enlight is pretty good against all of Scythe's ground options. Sword Blasters, I used to think it was Sword favored, but I do think Blasters have a okay time managing Sword's aerial game with Dare, and also their ground game with Dare. One of Sword's primary weaknesses is that it has no anti-air, and guns have a very good approach option from the air, so that's why I believe that's 50-50. Spear-wise, as you can see, every single matchup for Spear is good, so don't need to say much about it. Kind of just talked about Gun's approach. It's mainly from the air, and Spear D-Light just stuffs that. Katars and Sword, I used to, back in patch 3.24, if you remember, I had Katars rated as the second best weapon, and I used to think that Katars beat Sword in the matchup, but after nerfs to Dare, which, as I talked about earlier, is one of Sword's weaknesses because Dare is an aerial approach, I do think it's 50-50. If Katar Dare was better, then it would definitely be Katar favored, but it's not, so that's why it's 50-50. Axe, with the rest of these weapons, it is either bad or neutral with. I don't think Axe has much going for it other than against other heavy weapons, and I just think its long hitboxes, or long startup frames and recovery frames, are its bane. I definitely don't think that it has a good matchup into any of these other weapons. Bow, Sword feels to me like a better bow, and honestly, looking back at the past, Sword has consistently beaten Bow in tournament, even back to 2016 when Twilight would beat LDZ on Bow, even when Bow was extremely overtuned, and that's kind of why I think that Bow gets a little bit edged out by Sword in the matchup. Sword into Gauntlets, kind of similar to Axe, in how you have to deal with it by just spacing Gauntlets out with Enlight, and just managing it in the air with Nair, that kind of stuff. Scythe, 50-50. Like I said, I don't really know much about Scythe and how it really interacts with many of the weapons. I've only really played against Sandstorm with Scythe and Doughbrain occasionally, and it feels like I go even or better against them regardless of what I play. So I don't think that Scythe really does well, but I don't think that it loses either, and that's kind of why I place it like that. Blasters into Spear. A lot of people are going to call me biased on this one, but I do think that Spear edges it out slightly just because of the anti-air. Like I said earlier, Spear D-Light is just incredible at dealing with guns and all of its approaches. Blasters into Katars, kind of the same thing. It's just Katar D-Light this time, and Katars also have a much easier time juggling guns because of guns' long startup in the air. With axe, not really going to talk about it much after this, but yeah. It's just difficult to get in on any of the stronger weapons. Bow, I was debating putting the 70-30. I don't think that bow has any chance against guns at the highest level. But to give it credit, I think bow has the potential, with more calculated gameplay, to abuse D-Light against an unskilled gun player. But as long as you play around D-Light as the gun player, I don't think you'll have any trouble against bow. Gauntlets, same thing with guitars. Easy juggling and close range weapons tend to dismantle guns, and in the future any range weapons. I expect that to be a trend. Scythe, I think it's even. Maybe it's guns favored, but I do think that Scythe can manage guns to an extent with Nair and D-Light. Spear, as you can see, and I alluded to it earlier, it has every matchup is good. It stuffs ground approaches with N-Light and Side-Light, and it stuffs aerial approaches with Nair and D-Light, so I'm not going to talk about any of the matchups. That's all you need to do on Spear, is just stuff approaches and occasionally dash in and Side-Light. Guitars into axe, same thing as above. Guitars into bow, similar to sword, and how you can just approach on bow because they don't really have any anti-approach, and they can't really approach you without it being incredibly risky. Guitars into gauntlets. Gauntlets, they like to open you up from the air or from slightly above the ground. I mean, kind of the same thing, but different height off the ground is what I'm talking about, and both of those approaches do get stuffed by guitar D-Light, and that's why I think that guitars slightly edge out gauntlets in the matchup. And Scythe, same thing as I talked about earlier. Axe into bow, 50-50, kind of a neutral kind of matchup. This is the only non-heavy weapon that I would even consider to be axe favored, had axe been a bit better, but I don't think that axe has the tools necessary right now to actually push it over the top in this matchup. It's more just neutral. Axe, obviously, not good against close range weapons like gauntlets. And Scythe, maybe that is a 40-60 matchup for Scythe, but I don't believe that Axe gets completely stuffed by Scythe. I think Axe Side can, to an extent, manage Scythe's ground game. Bow into gauntlets, 50-50. Honestly, I just don't think that bow really excels at anything, but gauntlets can't really punish bow the way that weapons like sword and guns and spear can. Bow into Scythe, 50-50, two neutral weapons. Don't have much knowledge on that matchup. I don't think I can recall ever playing that matchup in a serious environment, so I don't really have many opinions on that. And then finally, gauntlets into Scythe. I do think that gauntlet D-Light helps immensely in the matchup, and I think that almost single-handedly wins it for gauntlets, as well as I do think gauntlets slightly out-prioritize Scythe off stage. That's all. Cannon, like I said earlier, I just don't really think that it has anything going for it, so we'll see. Hopefully you guys can use this. You know, you go down 0-1 in a set, you can switch it up to a better matchup. I mean, obviously this is all my opinion, you know. Say you lose to Hattori 80 times in ranked in a row, switching to another weapon that I say is a better matchup isn't going to auto win you the game. But yeah, thank you boys for watching. This may be uploaded at a later date. I'm anticipating it's going to be uploaded on Monday, let's check, Monday the 10th. As you can see, I'm recording this on the 5th. Tomorrow I'm going to DreamHack Montreal, but that will have already happened by the time that you see this. So yeah, thank you for watching. The growth so far on my channel has been absolutely insane. Thank you guys so much. Join my Discord. If you go into my Twitch stream and type !Discord, or maybe I may link it at the bottom in the description. But yeah, thank you, boys. Peace out.